Good evening and welcome to our 2028 election coverage. Today we are expecting some candidate announcements. We got breaking news out of Atlanta, Georgia right now. President John Ossoff has announced that he will run for re-election. And let's take a look at John Ossoff's popularity rating. And Ossoff is a very controversial as after the impeachment for sexual harassment, his popularity rating has been going down. 88% of Democrats approve of him, which isn't that good considering that is his own party. Now to Pierre, South Dakota today, Governor Kristi Noem has announced her presidential run. And let's take a look at her popularity rating. Currently, 45% approve of her and 45% disapprove, with 10% either not knowing or are neutral with her. For the Republican approval rating is pretty good. Democrat approval is alright considering that's not her party. And independent approval is also alright, but not very well liked among anybody. She's very controversial as well. And former governor of Florida, Ron DeSantis, has also kicked off a 2028 run. He is very highly approved of with a net 15% approval, 53% of independents, and 97% of Republicans. 5%, only 5% of Democrats approve him, which did go down recently with his attacks on Joe Biden a couple years ago. And also, got some breaking news out of South Carolina. Former UN ambassador and former governor Nikki Haley has formed an exploratory committee to run for president and is currently exploring the fact that she could run for president. And let's take a look at her approval rating. She's very highly approved of with Democrats with 15% approving of her, which is not bad. And only 20% of independents disapproving of her. Not a high approval rating, but not a low disapproval rating. Senator John James has also begun his 2028 candidacy, who unseated then incumbent Gary Peters in the 2026 midterms in the rematch of the 2020 election. Let's take a look at his popularity rating. He has a net +6 approval rating. He is pretty controversial against independents. Decent approval rating with Democrats. But 15% not knowing of him or neutral with him. Now at Minneapolis, Minnesota, we got a major news. Mike Lindell has formed a 2028 committee for president. He is not very well approved of. 5% of Democrats with 75%, only 75% approving of him. Considering that it's the party that he identifies with, is not that good. And out of New York City, New York, Mayor Eric Adams has kicked off a 2028 bid and will challenge John Ossoff in the Democratic primary. He is pretty highly approved of Republicans with 50% approving of him, and pretty highly approved of Democrats is alright with the Democrats, but in the independent, half of independents approve of him, which is pretty good for Eric Adams. And out of Lexington, Kentucky, Senator Rand Paul has announced a 2028 presidential run after an unsuccessful run in 2016. And he's a net -3% approval rating. 85 Republicans, 85% of Republicans approving of him, which isn't really that good for his party. And back in 2016, he was pretty hugely anti-Trump, but is now pro-Trump, which could possibly lower his approval rating of Republicans. New York City, New York, major news. Donald Trump Jr. has added to the presidential field and calls himself the true successor to Donald Trump. If you take a look at Donald Trump's popularity rating, he is a net -30 approval rating. 73% of Republicans approving of him, which isn't very good, and only 3% of Democrats, with only 19% of independents approving of him. And in Phoenix, Arizona, got more major news. Governor Kimberly Yee has started a 2028 presidential run, and she is very highly approved of, as she is a leader of the Republican Governors Association. a net 13 plus approval rating, and pretty highly approved of independents. And Democrats' approval rating is all right. Now, out of Little Rock, Arkansas, Senator Tom Cotton has kicked off a 2028 campaign at a rally in Little Rock, Arkansas. He has a net plus 3 approval rating, with half the country approving of him. 95 Republicans approving them, which is pretty well, and 52% of independents, which is decently all right. Also in Texas, we got breaking news. Senator Ted Cruz has begun a presidential run after unsuccessful attempts in 2016 and 2024. Take a look at him. He is pretty controversial. Only 43% approving of him and 47% disapproving of him. An all-right approval rating with the Republicans, which is pretty low for a member of that party, and pretty decently bad independent approval rating, but overall not very good approval ratings across the board. Out of New York City, New York, we have major news. Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez has announced a 2028 presidential run and a challenge to incumbent President Jon Ossoff. She is not liked among many voters. Only 85% of her own party approves of her, which only 3% of Republicans, and a not very good approval rating among independents. St. Louis, Missouri, Josh Hawley announced a run for president, and his approval rating is even at 45. 91% of Republicans, which isn't really that good, but better than Ted Cruz and Rand Paul. And his independent approval rating is all right, and a terrible Democratic approval rating, which is expected of all Republican candidates. On to New York City, New York, major news. Speaker of the House, Elise Stefanik, has begun a 2028 run in New York, calling herself the most electable, being able to appeal to minority voters and women. Let's take a look at her approval rating. She is very highly approved of. 55% approving of her, with 37% disapproving of her. 14% of Democrats do approve of her, which is pretty good, and 90% of Republicans, as well as 45% as of independents. In Santa Clara, California, we have major news. Representative Mike Garcia has announced his 2028 candidacy on Capitol Hill this morning. And you can take a look at his approval rating. He is pretty well approved of as unseated an incumbent Democrat in his district. And half of independents approve him, which is pretty good, and 17% of Democrats approve of him, which is overall pretty good numbers across the board. This is the initial polling for the Democratic primary. 85% say they will vote for Jon Ossoff, with 10% saying Eric Adams and 5% saying Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. This is the initial polling for the Republican primary. Ron DeSantis currently leads at 19%, and Nikki Haley not far behind at 16%, as well as Kimberly Yee behind her at 14%, and John James surprising at 11%. And Josh Hawley at 8%, Kristi Noem at 6%, Elise Stefanik and Mike Garcia both at 5%, Tom Cotton at 4%, Rand Paul, Ted Cruz, and Donald Trump Jr. both at 3%, and Mike Lindell at 2%. So, hopefully you like this video, and subscribe to never miss an episode of the 2022 Midterms to the 2040 Presidential Election Series. Until next time, peace out.